So in this conversation, Chantel's really going to help us introduce the concept of archetypes from Caroline Myss's book, Sacred Contracts. And it's something that I got interested in because of Shantel. And so we started a book club for the month of July. If you are not in the book club and want to be, you're totally welcome to join us. We meet on Tuesday afternoons. We'll have the information in the show notes and over on our Facebook community, the Reiki Cafe community. And really, I mean, as soon as Shantel introduced the topics of sacred contracts and archetypes, I was having instant aha moments. And for this point in my spiritual practice, that's kind of rare to be like, what now? Oh, that totally makes sense. And where does this go? So because it was so exciting to be introduced to new information that had such a deep, profound connection for me, I was like, we got to do a book club. We got to do a podcast interview. We all need to read this. We need to look into this further. And so I'm really excited about today's conversation and what Chantel's going to be sharing with us. So I'm reading Sacred Contracts. I'm going through the book. I'm taking notes, but Chantel's been in it a lot longer than I have. So I'm really excited to have her area of expertise on with us and to hopefully introduce you to the concept of archetypes, what it means, and how it influences our lives on the daily. So with that, thanks, Shantel, for joining me in this conversation.
Yeah, I really do enjoy this conversation, and I like how it organically just grew from a conversation that we had, and then me bringing the cards and like, hey, let's do our archetypical wheel. And I think it just unfolded for us in such a natural way to be like, okay, now we're going to do book club, and we're going to read the book, and we're going to do, readings and all this stuff. And so I have been introduced to it probably about 10 years ago when the first time like the book came across my path. And I picked it up here and there, but it's definitely something that has been in my conscious, awareness and everything, and it just keeps reintroducing itself. And so more recently, um, it has it has imprinted itself more in my life than 10 years ago or whatever. But to know about the archetypes, I just find it so fascinating because really we all are aware of what a archetype label is, as far as if you recognize, if we all think of what a nurse looks like, or we all think about what a doctor looks like, or anything like that, we can put that visual to them. We can put that label to them. We can put their traits and all of that. And that's really kind of what the very basic of what archetypes are. And so I just wanted to dive deeper in our conversation today on how it shows up spiritually and how we're able to work with them every single day.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. Um, I was reading this morning about where the sacred contracts and archetypes are held, like where is their location in our energy field? And I was like, of course, it's the eighth energy field, right? It
Yes.
like is that space where our spirit connects with divine source energy. Of course, it's going to be with our soul contracts and bringing that information. Like we've decided who we are and how we're going to show up in the world before we were born, and
Yeah.
I love that idea of like, we know what we need to learn in the lifetime. And so we choose the roles that we're going to play. And it's not like you're just the nurse or you're just the rescuer or you're just the warrior or whatever the archetype might be, but you're a collection of them. And
Mm-hmm.
that idea of going, here I am on my mission for Earth, if you will. And these are the roles I need to play in my theater production of my life. So I instigate the learnings and lessons that I need for my soul. And so
Yeah.
I love this is when I think about archetypes, that's really what comes through to me is like, what role am I playing to instigate the learnings in which I need?
Mm-hmm. So I love like introducing soul contracts because that's really how it really connects as well, is that when we are creating our soul contract or agreement with our soul family, our tribe, all of that, it is the idea of choosing certain archetypes that we're working with. So my understanding is we have our primary archetype wheel, we have 12, and they align with our 12 houses and our 12 zodiacs. So each pie chart, if you will, on the wheel itself, when you map it out, there's an archetype per each chart or for each pie chart, and then it connects to which house it goes in. And then that is like the dominating pattern behavior that we have within, like if it's our home, if it's our spirituality, if it's our health and wellness. And then there's an archetype that works with that and how we show up, whether it's showing up in our more conscious awareness side or it's showing up in our shadow self. And so that's really the interesting part too, is because it's that duality. So it's the light and the dark, right? So how do we show up? Are we healed in it or are we unhealed in it? And when we can recognize our patterns, we can really go through our life and say, oh my gosh, and accountability can come in and change can come in because they are our like spiritual companions. It's like having 12 additional guides that are there working with us, but they are interacting with us on a very like personal and intimate level because they're triggering us to stay on our path, whether it's to wake us up in our behaviors and how we're acting and responding to certain situations, or they're really aligning us to what it is we're here to do.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that was another piece that I really enjoyed when learning about archetypes is that it's not flat. There's a shadow side and there's a light side to every single one. There's no archetype that like, here's the ideal. Here's the ideal archetype. Like that doesn't exist. No, none of us are perfect. And perfection doesn't exist because how are we going to learn if we're like perfectly perfect? Right.
Exactly. No, there is no learning if if everything is perfect and all of that. So I'm listening to the audio as well as reading the book right now, and she talks about that. Like when you're mapping out your chart, she goes, automatically people want to connect to what speaks to the ego. Oh, I'm the queen, I'm the mystic, I'm the healer, I'm this, I'm that. We want all the positive ones, right? But the whole point of it is to recognize your patterns throughout life. So she just maps it out so beautifully in her audio, but also in the book. But it's just how it is that we can see ourselves. And she goes all the way back to like 5. She's like, show the pattern of self from the age of 5 or the earliest memory that you have, and recognize how that pattern has shown up throughout your entire life. And that is what the archetype is. And then when you pull it and you work it into your will, then you can see why it shows up like that. And it's pretty fascinating. And it's very like aha moments all day long when you're looking at your will and you're asking it, like giving questions to it, and you can figure out that's why this is happening. That's why I act that way. I respond this way.
Totally. Absolutely. So just to give a little bit more background on the wheel so our audience can understand it a little more. So there's 12 zodiac signs, there's 12 houses, and each house represents a certain aspect of your life. So one house might be your identity, your appearance, your personal actions, your instincts, whereas another house might be your work routines and how you connect with employees and colleagues and your health, right? So each house is a different aspect of your life, and you show up in different archetypes per house.
Yeah.
So when you look at your wheel, that's what we're talking about. And so do you want to just any more definition?
Yes. And for those who are watching the video, and for those who are listening, I'm just showing the chart of origin, and this is our archetypical wheel. And so it's a large circle. It's divided into 12 houses, with the center being the identifiers of each house. And then on the outside, it has numbers that represent the house number and as well as the zodiac. So that's what's important too, is if like for mine, my healer is in my 9th house. The 9th house is about spirituality, which is Sagittarius. Okay. So when you can take the zodiac. So you take the traits of Sagittarius, right? So Sagittarius energy is ruled by planet Jupiter, which is a very expansive energy, right? So, and then having that in spirituality, and then having my healer in there, that shows at some point in my lifetime, in my contract, the healer in me is going to show up. Whether I was having to go through certain levels of trauma and abuse or whatever it was so that I could heal myself. And then eventually, from going internal to external, help others. That is something I signed up for. So when you can read it like that, so then the saboteur, and I'll talk about our four primary, but the saboteur for me shows up in my home. So my fourth house, which is Cancer, and my home life. So as a child, because I went through a lot of grief, losing my father at 4 years old and everything, the Cancer, as Cancers, we can be very internal, right? That's the trait of Cancer, very internal. They go within their shell. They're very emotional. So when you use the traits of Cancer plus the saboteur and the home, that means for me, that's going to show up. How was I sabotaging myself within my family unit? How was I showing up? Maybe I was very anti-authority. You know, I didn't want to listen to anybody. And it wasn't like as a child, it actually turned up more in my teenage years. So when I started going through puberty and stuff and not have had any healing through the trauma I had experienced in my earlier years, that's how it showed up for me. So then I had to learn how to alchemize the saboteur and become become my own like savior, so to speak. You know, I had to pull myself up and out of that and stop sabotaging my experiences, stop blocking myself, everything like that. So when you read the wheel, you can really see your patterns and how you show up in your own life and
Yeah.
how people are showing up in your life because it comes back to soul contracts and what are the archetypes that you're working with in the relationships that you have, family, friends, partnerships, all of that.
Yeah, totally.
So it's very, very big. It's a very
It,
big concept
it
on a
is,
little paper.
right? Well, and I think that's why when we worked with it, it was like, oh, this is how I show up in my marriages or relationships. And this is how I show up in my life values or in my relationship with the world. Like my relationship with the world showed up as rebel in my 11th
Yeah.
house. And I'm like, of course it does, because
Yeah.
I'm all about breaking the box and like letting and inviting people to see beyond the institutional structures that we've been given. Like that made total sense to me. I'm like, of course, rebel would show up there. Like I'm a rule breaker in that way and want to invite people to know that it's okay to not fit in. We can fit out and be held in such a beautiful way. So like, yeah, I'm the rebel there. And even though like if you actually look at my life, like, no, I've never been pulled over before. I've never gotten any kind of trouble, right? Like those types of things. But in my psyche, that rebel shows up in the work that I do and how I'm perceived within my relationship to the world is very rebellious.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what you do, what you contracted in this lifetime to come in and do as a Reiki master, a teacher, opening up this platform for everyone, it's like you absolutely did because you're going against all of the society norms.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, oh, what are you a teacher of? Oh, energy healing. And, I work with shamanic practices and all this stuff. And so, yes, it's very much the rebel showing up because you're going against the grain of what's normal in our society, in our 3D reality.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
And
Okay, so
to see that.
it's fun to see it. Well, that's it. It's fun to see where everything shows up, but every single chart has four universal archetypes. And I would really like to get into those because I think people need to understand that we do have commonalities. We do have commonalities in that each of us has a victim, each of us has a saboteur, each of us has a prostitute, and each of us has a child, like a child archetype. And that is something that we all have across the board. We each have those archetypes put in our wheel. And it's to really help support us in our big life lessons. And so can
Mhm.
you describe what each of those four do and represent as they are expressed in our lives?
Yes. So collectively, like you're saying, we all share the same four, okay, which is the saboteur, the victim, the prostitute, and the child. With the child, there are six different child archetypes, which are the divine child, the wounded child, the nature child, the magical child, eternal child, and the orphan child. So when you're going through and actually mapping it out, is you're going to choose one of the child archetypes that resonates with you the most. And there is a way of doing like charting it. You don't just grab it and go, oh, that's for me, but it's really tuning in and doing some deep work and analyzation of self to say, okay, that's the child that really resonates with me, right? And she explains it in a way that you're going to feel animated. When there's an archetype that connects and communicates with you, you're going to feel that animation within yourself. Whether that's goosebumps, whatever it is, the chills that we receive, to say, yes, that's me. And so, going back to the other four, the victim is how we're attached to our story and how we, everything is happening to me. Why is nothing ever works for me? I'm immediately going to become the victim in all situations. Okay. So that's playing the victim. But the victim can also be on the light side of it, gives us the heads up of things that might be coming at us that aren't for our highest good. And that's when you're working with that light side of any of the archetypes. They're also, like I was saying earlier, there are companions, there are allies. So they're going to give us heads up of like, pay attention. This might not be for your highest good. Listen to your intuition. So that's where their nudging comes from. And when you have a close relationship with them, you're going to recognize when a situation that can create victimhood will show up. So if you are retelling your story all the time, restarting the clock on your past, that's the victim saying, okay, it's time to release this, heal this, move through this. The prostitute isn't like if you're sexually selling your body, which could possibly be, your experience, but really what it is how do you prostitute yourself by giving away more of your energy than you should, by saying yes when you mean to say no. And so that's what the prostitute is. Like when the chips are down, are you going to fold and kind of sell your soul for it? Like, and that's what the prostitute is. The saboteur is how we sabotage ourselves, how we create obstacles, blockages, how, when you feel like you're on a roll, say at work, right? You're go, 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 and everything's working out. And then suddenly at the dead end that, you trip yourself up. Like people who are afraid to succeed, or they're afraid to fail or whatever. There's going to be some self-sabotaging behavior that occurs because there's some limiting belief, there's some connection, and it always comes back to the chakras, our energy centers as well, to what do we believe about ourselves and how does that connect to our archetypes and show up in our life. So then the fourth one is saboteur, victim, prostitute. Oh, and then your child. How does our inner child show up in our adult life? Do we let them take the wheel? Do we, like if we had abandonment issues as a child, does that mean now we're going to sabotage every relationship we have because we are in fear that we will be abandoned by the one that we love? Or are we going to be like the eternal child is you don't grow up? It's kind of like that Peter Pan syndrome. So when you start putting archetypes that are in our fairy tales, and that's what a lot of them are as well, is recognizing the archetypes like in all of our fairy tales and our Disney characters and all of that. That's a lot of them. So if you as a child were given everything you wanted and you were never like you never grew up as a man or a woman, if you aren't mature enough, you're going to always show up as that person that never wants to grow up. Right. So maybe you don't pay your bills all the on time. Maybe you're not responsible at work. You're not responsible with your children. You're not responsible in your relationship because it's always about you as the eternal child and everything needs to happen for me instead of me doing what I need to do for my own self.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so interesting. It's so
Right.
interesting. Can you speak to just briefly like the six different types of childs as they show up? Because I think part of it is that since Reiki Cafe oftentimes spends a lot of attention on inner child, I think there's a connection between the inner child and the archetype of our child self and the archetypal wheel. And I would love just to kind of give that explanation just a little deeper on what are those different kinds, because it's like if it doesn't resonate for you, I could see you like getting glassy eyed and just going right over your head, and then when you hear yours you're like, that's me, right?
So, okay, so like I said, there's the divine child, wounded, nature, magical, eternal, and orphan. So, to be honest, I don't know every single one. I knew a little bit of each one because I focus more. Mine is the wounded child. So, for me, I'll start with that one first. So, as the wounded child, dealing with grief and that kind of thing, I immediately, as a young child, was introduced to a lot of trauma. And so, those wounds have shown up in my life as fear of loss, fear of death, fear of abandonment, fear of not being accepted, right? So then what ends up happening is if you're not going to accept me, then I'm going to go out and act a certain way that is going to create acceptance somewhere. So that's like bad attention is better than no attention kind of thing, right? So that's where a lot of addictions might show up, or being the rebel might show up, any of that kind of stuff, because you're going to find a tribe, you're going to find your people that are going to accept and applaud you for whatever it is you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes that turns into more negative relationships, toxic relationships. The divine child, I believe, is really connecting to being like the God child, which I believe is the one that you got, right?
Yeah, so it's definitely related to both the innocence of that child, um, that idea that there's purity and redemption and godlike qualities, and
Mm-hmm.
the child enjoys that special union with divine. Like they have that internal, like this is like the Jesus was a divine child, like knew from a very young age that they were had divinity. That one's mine.
Yeah.
Yeah, second house, life values.
And I think that's where that innocence comes in. So where you are going to be a lot more innocent in people and what their agendas are towards you, that kind of stuff, right? We're not necessarily having that fight or flight or that big higher awareness of self or what others might do to you, right? Whereas a wounded child, yeah, I'm alert all the time because it's like I've experienced that in my life. And as I've gotten older, I've been able to heal through a lot of that. So now I don't see the negative so much in somebody coming into my life or what their purpose is or their agenda or whatever. But as a child, yeah, I was really ready for that. Then there's the nature child. So that's when you're really connecting to animals, you're connecting to nature. On a really good side is you're probably going to be somebody who grows up that wants to work with shelter animals or a farm. You're going to have that kind of a lifestyle versus the, I'm going to say, shadow side of it is you're kind of going to maybe be a little, I don't know, I'm going to say flaky, or you're going to be a little more like you're more worried about being in nature and working with animals than you are with humans.
Mhm.
So that connection's not there. You're not able to build the connection with your people because you have more of a connection with your animals.
Right. I
And
think
then
that's my daughter. Like she's
that's your daughter.
definitely more connected with nature than with humans.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people like that feel that because probably at some point in their life, they were able to connect to their dog more than their parents. And then that just developed as they became an adult. And then those are the people that have like 6 cats and 10 dogs, and then people go to their house and they're like, whoa, I can't, your house is wild, it's like, it's a lot. The orphan child is the abandoned child, which is also my understanding is it's in the wounded child as well, but the orphan is where a parent left or, that kind of thing where you were orphaned as a child.
And then the orphan is really focused on like their path of survival,
Mm-hmm.
trying to
Mm-hmm.
figure out their own independence because
Yeah, exactly.
for that
I
feeling.
can do for me because you can't do it for me kind of thing. very hard-headed. I can do it for myself. And I can see that even for me, as a single mom for quite a few years as well. And even in my my marriage, because of being the wounded child, I will stand on my own 2 feet. If you don't show up for me, I am really quick to do for me what you can't do. And then in my current marriage, I really have had to heal through that and let that go and recognize, okay, I can depend on you because you show up. He shows up in my life where my ex could never show up. Well, he was a major self-sabotager. So the moment he worked for the railroad and he worked for many railroads and he would always get up to that foreman position, that boss position, and then he would sabotage it and get fired. Every railroad. He worked with every railroad in California, like 5 or 6 different railroads, and he always got fired from them. And it's like he was so afraid to have that title or to succeed or fail or whatever it was, but he would create those patterns that he would lose his job. So I always had to be the one to stand up and make sure that my income was steady to support my kids. And so that really, when it shows up, right? So that means there is nothing in me that could ever let my guard down. I always had to have my guard up. Now I'm in a position where I can flow different because he has proven to me that I can trust that. And that has allowed me to do the inner work of healing. So that's me alchemizing my wounded child.
I love that. I love that story because then you can see how numerous roles are showing up. So like even with your ex, that railroad employee, there's the saboteur and there's the inner child for themselves showing up, which instigates and pokes at your inner child and what they need to work on. Like, and this is what we're talking about. Like, it's about the interaction between two or more parties of why we chose these roles to learn what we need to
Yeah.
learn and do what we need to do. And then finally have the people in our life that create a safe space so that we can alchemize it into the light. Like even the saboteur has a light side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Like if he would have taken the opportunity to try to heal through his I would say would is a wounded child, but he was an orphan child. So his father went to go get milk and never returned. Like literally that was his story. He had a deaf mother who was abused by many men, and so he was the protector. So for the father role in him, he had a really hard time stepping up and being a dad because he was still in that orphan wounded child mentality. And then when it's like there comes a point where it's like if you can't work through your own stuff, then the contract comes to an end, right? And that's where divorce shows up and relationships fall apart and all of that. Because if the lessons have been learned, at some point that contract can come to an end. And I think that's why in a lot of ways there is such a higher divorce rate, as I think there's a lot of souls that came in to end certain contracts from past lifetimes. And we're in this lifetime now to say, okay, let's get this, like, let's go in, take care of this, end it as it needs to end, and then move forward. And so, when you can see the patterns of it, it just is. It's just like, okay. And not everyone is aware of that, but you can really connect the dots in so many different ways.
I think that's really interesting that the idea of we're in a time and a generation that if divorce is more accessible, like let's just put that up,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's more accessible, but I feel like in my own divorces, it feels like I had worked through all of the things that I needed to learn in that relationship. I've checked the boxes off and it felt like lifetimes. And so I feel like I'm on my third lifetime, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
because things are moving so much faster. We didn't need to take 50 years to figure it out. We could do it in 3 or 10 or whatever it is to say yes to like those learnings. I think we're all showing up in a different capacity of what is it I need and what is it that I need to learn and how do I need to move forward and who are the people in my life to help me get to that point. And sometimes I think it's kind of one-sided. Like I learned what I needed to learn, but maybe the other party didn't. But then in the divorce process, it gives them the opportunity to learn the things that they needed to learn.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. In the audio, and I'm not sure so much in the book Sacred Contracts, but in the audio of Sacred Contracts, she talks about Helen Keller, and she uses her as a really great example of how we create our soul contract. So she says, okay, let me say, like for us personally, she goes, I'm just envision that I'm your angel, and I'm going to scoop you up and put you up on this cloud. I'm going to ask you, what do you want to do in this lifetime? And, on an ego side, we're like, oh, I want to be a healer. I want to open this. I want to be a teacher, whatever it is you want to do. But then you have to think about what is the bigger picture for humanity, for the collective, for the divine expression to come through you, right? So when the example she does is Helen Keller. And so there's this soul that says, I want to change the view of the lens or the scope for the deaf and blind. So then the angel or whoever, the guide says to her, okay, well, then that means that you yourself have to also be deaf and blind. So they agree to it. So then they say, okay, now you need to have a teacher and you need to have your parents and you need to have this that are willing to come together and do this contract with you. And so she pulls in the teacher, which is Anne Sullivan. And she says, all right, I'll be your teacher, but I also have to have an experience with deaf and blind. So that way I am relatable to you. And then I got to go in first because I have to be older than you. And then the parents come forward and they're like, okay, we're willing to, we love you. We want to contract with you. We're going to do this with you. Right. And so then they descend, they go and incarnate and they become her parents. And then she agrees that I think it's 18 months that she will become sick with meningitis, I think it is. And then she becomes deaf and blind. And at some point, they bring in Anne Sullivan. And if you don't know the story of Ellen Keller, she is a very wild child, angry, abusive, and parents just don't know what to do with her. So Anne Sullivan comes in and really takes her and is just like, you can't act like this, and teaches her how to sign within her hand and by water. So Anne is walking on the property and she finds a water fountain and she's touching the water, and then Helen does that, and then Anne comes over and shows her the sign for water, puts it up in her mouth, and teaches her that's water. That's what opens her up to the understanding of the world around her without being able to see and without being able to hear. And she becomes a very famous woman, very powerful. And then the two main people that come through and are her guides in life, or that work with her in life and line up with her, is Edison and Alexander Graham Bell, which are both in communication. But they connect with her and then they establish the first deaf and blind school in the United States. That's a contract that comes in and changes our entire collective perspective.
Yes.
Right. Yeah, and when you
totally.
can see how it all works, it's not by chance, it's all divinely planned.
Right.
By us.
Right. Exactly. And I think when we can take a step back and go, who's playing what role in my life, it's so fascinating. It's so fascinating how we kind of create together before we're born the roles in which we play. And you can see this also in fictional stories and movies. Like you can see the archetypes. So even though that there's a total of 72 archetypes, everyone knows, like when we think of warrior, what that looks like, or when we hear the term healer, we know what that looks like, or mentor, or virgin, or whatever it is. We know, we kind of have this automatic idea of what that could possibly mean. And then we can start seeing which role are people showing up in, and yes, do they show up in different ways for different events in their life? Like that's interesting to me too, because in one scenario, I feel like we almost have like 12 faces, 12 primary faces in which we show up in. And so in some instances, I might be very innocent. And then on the other hand, I'm totally a rebel, right? And so it's very interesting to have this self-awareness of what energy am I possessing in this moment? What level of connectivity am I in this moment? How am I presenting myself, and how are others presenting? And so that in which we can learn our major life lessons and create and move forward in our purpose for the bigger understanding of the world. It's just fascinating to me.
Yeah, it really is. And it's like using yours, it's like, yeah, you can be the lover in one situation and totally be the rebel in another. And with that contrast, that shows the different sides of our personality and why we can respond the way we do in so many different scenarios. Or why certain people automatically we feel like I've known you forever, and then other people we're like, oh my gosh, I can't have you in my energy space. Why is that? Well, we're all a part of, like we contract even with the smallest of things, like the smallest of meet and greets can create a whole entire energy change. Like if you've ever met somebody that you only had a moment, a quick conversation, but that person lit something up in you that you walked away really happy and excited, like, wow, that was such an amazing conversation, right? That is like that's an example of just a small one where maybe that person contracted with you to shift you from a negative emotion to a positive emotion. So then the next part of your life, like the next thing, you're going into a meeting, and then this meeting now turned out to be an amazing experience, and you signed contracts and did all of this. But if you wouldn't have met that person, maybe going into that meeting, you would have had a negative experience because you were in a bad mood. And so when we can kind of see it, there's no coincidences. And people always ask me, like in my work and everything, clients and everything, well, do you believe that there's no coincidences? And in my experience, I'm going to say no. I feel like there's always an energy exchange. There's a reason why things happen the way they happen. And, whether that's with somebody or it's with yourself or, you're connected to nature, whatever it is, there's always a purpose and a reason for it.
Right.
I don't think it's
Right.
just by chance.
I don't either. And it's just like, it's so mind boggling. Like, I recently met someone, I was like, wow, I would have had a completely different reaction to you if we had met 4 months ago.
Yes.
Like that, like I feel
So
like
then there's timing.
there's all this divine timing at play of going, no, I had to meet you now in this perfect moment. And there was a piece of like, I needed to be in full, my spirit was in preparation for this meeting. Your spirit was in preparation for this meeting. And had we met any earlier, it wouldn't have worked. Right.
Yeah.
And so like having that step back moment of going, oh my God, I love life so much. Like there's this piece of like, of course it's set up this way. Of course it's set up this way. And when we can walk through life of going, what's the lessons and learnings here? And have that broader picture, we step out of that victimhood mode. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's fascinating. So my chart is really interesting in that the 4 primary universals are in my first 4 houses. And I feel like that's got to be something. That's got to mean that like really intense, or like there's everything's happening so close to my personality, my values, my expression, my home, like all of it's happening right away of those 4 primary. And it's just the whole thing is just fascinating to me. I can't wait to finish the book and figuring out how we can incorporate this in even our courses, because it's so profound to allow people to see that bigger picture.
Mm-hmm. It really is stepping outside of our perspective box, right? Because of this, I think this conversation alone, if people don't already know of Caroline Myss, this is going to plant a lot of seeds, a lot of like aha moments of, oh my gosh, I never even thought about that. And for example, like people get road rage all the time, right? Mad that you got stopped at a light, or mad at this or that. And there's always like this joke of, oh, maybe I was saved by from an accident or this or that. Yes, you can actually imprint that and say, there is some reason why you're being slowed down, or a reason why you're being sped up, because there is a purpose in that. It's like if you see it as like these 2 like timelines that are coming together, there's going to be something. In my current relationship, we didn't meet until we were both 40 years old, but we're like 2 degrees away from ever meeting each other, because my sister ran in the same group that he ran with her whole life, and me and him never met. Like we know the same people. We live in like right next to each other, but we never met until we were meant to meet.
Yes.
And then it's like, okay, and both of us are on the same spiritual path. So it's like very interesting because if I would have met him back in his younger days, when he thought he was like Don Juan and all this stuff, I probably wouldn't have, because I had to go have my babies and go do all the things I needed to do with my ex, because I was already in contract to have them, to have my children, right? And in our group, I use my son as an example. So as for my contract with him, my middle son was born deaf. Well, I knew nothing of deaf people, of sign language, or anything prior to him coming and being born. My ex mother-in-law was, but she was very distant in our relationship. So it wasn't like I had a lot of exposure with her. So when my son was born, I was a psych major. I wanted to go to school to be a counselor and to work with troubled teens and teen moms and all this stuff. And so that was where I was at. Then my son was born. I started learning sign language because I wanted to be the parent that could communicate with my kid, and knowing there's only literally 15% of parents with deaf children learn sign language. So I'm just going to put that ratio out there. It's pretty freaking insane. Yes, right?
That's
And
crazy.
I did not want to be that mom. I watched Mr. Holland's Opus. If you haven't watched that, there's a moment in there where the mom freaks out and it's a little tangent, but it was such an impactful scene that I was like, yes, I just need to learn to communicate with my son. Well, then I became an interpreter because of that, right? So he introduced me to the deaf community, to sign language. And then he transitioned when he was 16. So then it's like now, like the grieving parent. So there's all these roles that my son taught me. And then in the end, now, I'm a Reiki practitioner. So it's like his impact on my life and my contract was so huge with him. And some parents might go, "Oh, you have a deaf child." And I'm like, "Hell yeah, I have a deaf child." It's amazing to have a deaf child. Like, he was an amazing human being. And he taught me so, so much. And so, even having children that are on the spectrum, or that have different, what we consider disabilities, that's a soul that came into this lifetime to really lift their spiritual experience. They're leveling up by coming in and doing that, and to teach us how to have compassion and love and acceptance for who they are. Not just to put them, like back in the day, deaf children would go to hearing schools and they would have to sit on their hands. And if they got caught signing, they would smack them.
Wow.
They were trying to take away their language and make them hearing and verbal. Well, they're not hearing and they're not verbal. And so they've had to fight through their whole entire history just to be able to communicate. Right. And so it's just amazing to see who has come into our world to make such big changes.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I love that. Thank you for sharing that story. And it just once again shows us it's all about this big picture concept. Like I really feel like we're in that crown chakra energy, that eighth energy field energy of understanding why we are the way we are and why the people in our lives are the way they are. And we get to have the opportunity to step away from the drama and like actually go, why is this occurring? What am I supposed to learn here? How is this supposed to influence my life and prepare me for the next thing? Right? Like we all have hard times. We all have stuff. And I'll say that again and again. We all have stuff where no one is perfect. But if we can understand those areas in us that have been attracting the people, places, things in our life, it all is to instigate us on this spiritual path and journey. And the more that we are ready for walking that spiritual journey, the easier and easier it becomes. Like, no longer do I have road rage. No longer do I have this. Like, when something goes wrong, doesn't go the way I planned, I can take a step back and go, maybe there's a bigger reason and purpose why I didn't make that appointment, or why I need to be patient right now, or like, and not have this person, this relationship in my life, or whatever it may be. Like, we can start going, I trust that everything is happening for reason and purpose, and I can just let that path unfold as it needs to, rather than trying to control it. And so many of us try to control the path. And it reminds me of Isabel when she first started. She was in school as a nurse, and then she went on to psychology, and then she did this. And I'm watching her make these changes and going, everything is exactly lining up the way it's supposed to. So, and even though I could see where she would end up, like in my foresight and my crown chakra energy, I knew exactly where she was going, but she couldn't see it yet. And it wasn't my responsibility to reveal that to her.
Yeah.
Right? Like she needed those life lessons. And it happens again and again and again. I see people in their struggle, and I don't give my opinion for the most part unless someone blatantly asks for it. Right? I will watch them struggle. I can hold space for them and watch them struggle, and stay back from the drama and get called in for that piece of love and support. But at the same time, I don't have to emotionally invest and get involved in that level of drama and that level of frequency, when I can see, oh, this is happening for their greater good. This is happening for a spiritual purpose. I don't need to do anything. And really, until someone, like, I have a friend and I love her, and she oftentimes, it's like once every 2 years, she's like my bestie, and she has had a lot of things happen in her life that she's struggled with. And when she finally asked me, okay, Christine, I know you have an opinion on this. What is it? Until that point, I just hold space. And that's my role, because the events that are happening in her life are there to teach her something. And who am I to give away the lesson before they learn it?
Yeah. Right.
And so when she asks me my opinion, when she finally gets to that point, because she knows I'm sitting back while holding my tongue. Like she knows I'm doing that. So when she gets to the point, she's actually ready to hear what I have to say.
You know what it reminds me too is, this is an example that I use, I want to say in Reiki level 1, is that it's kind of going back to the precepts of getting permission, right, to send Reiki to somebody. Because let's say that person contracted to get sick and, like, say, have cancer, but in their contract, they're meant to meet the doctor that's going to cure it, or that's going to find some cure for whatever it is they have going on. And then we're over here without permission, sending Reiki to them, healing them on a different level. You know what I mean? And then it's that interference. And I think that's how we can really, like, step back, like you're saying, and be the observer of situations and what people are going through. So the lessons are meant to learn are here to do it. They're here. We can't always be the rescuer. And I think that's where wounded rescuer comes in from. It's not being the healer, it's being a wounded rescuer, because we want to rescue everyone from their situations, and we can't do that because they do have purpose. They have to learn what they're supposed to learn.
Right.
And a lot of people step into that rescuer role. They want to save everybody, and not everybody needs to be saved.
It's such a good point. It's such a good point, because I think there's a lot of healers to get that confused. Right? There's a lot of wounded rescuers that just want to step in and fix it for them, when that's not their job as a healer. Like, as a profession, if we are Reiki practitioners, if we're shamanic practitioners, if we're doing healing work, it's not our job to rescue anyone. We need to shine the light so the individuals can rescue themselves.
Yeah, right? Exactly. Yeah. Even though we want to do it all, but it's, when you learn that, it's a big learning lesson too for us in our profession, to say, no, you have to get permission. I have to receive permission. And I know we can go to the higher self and there's all these things we can do. But if somebody verbally gives you a no, it's like, well, you got to just take that for what it is.
Right. Totally. I had a student from years ago call me up kind of in a panic. And I don't have people call my phone, like no one actually rings me anymore. And so she was ringing me and I was like, who is this? Like, I haven't talked to her. And she was kind of having this moment of like, oh my gosh, my ex-mom, like my stepmom, who is no longer part of our lives, is sending curses to my brother. And how can I stop it? I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. This has
Mm.
nothing to do with you. This is a contract between her and him. You're not involved. Just because you witness something doesn't mean that you have any responsibility to get involved and fix it, because this is what will happen. If you go in, you break those lines, those contracts between those two, they're just going to come right back and you're wasting your energy.
Yep.
Right? Like they have
Yep.
to learn the lessons, each of them. And so if your brother is not willing to accept Reiki, is not willing to accept help, or not willing to accept support, you have to honor that. They have to hit their own rock bottom of what they need. And so that they can say yes to the healing in a more profound way. And so I think there's a lot of people who, as healers, we just want to send Reiki to the people on TV who we see on the news, or we want to do X, Y, and Z. And it's like, why? Let's first step back and go, what is going on within me that makes me want to send the healing? Where am I getting triggered? And so it's ego playing out of I want to fix someone, right?
100%. Yes,
right?
yes, yes.
And so
it is.
It's huge. It's huge to actually pause and break and step back and say, what is going on with us? How am I showing up in the world to be of service? And sometimes to be of service is to be silent, to witness and watch someone go through the hard times without getting involved.
Yeah. Yeah. And then that's what all throat chakra right there too, right? Is learning when to speak, when not to speak, when to listen, when to see, when we're putting those senses together. It's really learning how to be within our own hoop of energy and not stepping into somebody else's just because we know that we have the capacity or the capability to probably help them, or to bring some kind of healing or release or whatever it is. But if they're not asking for it, then we are really stepping over boundaries. And then when you're looking at that archetype, how is that showing up? Right. And then when we can see that, the pattern in what we're doing, and like for me, for example, I've always been that rescuer, right? Like, I'm going to help you. I'm going to help you. And then in the end, a lot of times it comes back and it bites me in the ass. I'm the one that ends up getting that it doesn't work for. And so I've learned, no, that doesn't work. There's a reason why they're going through certain things. And I just stay out of it as much as I can now.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think that's a great place to wrap up the conversation.
All right.
We would love to know what your takeaways from this conversation have been. Go let us know in our Facebook group, which is called Reiki Cafe Community. Know that if you want to go grab that book, Sacred Contracts, if you want to listen to the Audible version on Sacred Contracts and join our book club, you're more than welcome to. You'll find all of the information over on that Facebook group, Reiki Cafe Community. We meet on Tuesday afternoon. So it's 3:30 Pacific and 6:30 Eastern. Figure out your time zone. So you're welcome to join us. We're going to be having conversations on the archetypes moving forward. And then also know that Shantel is an amazing reader. And so if you want to create your own archetypal wheel using the archetypes and have a session with Shantel to understand what archetypes are showing up for you and which house wheels, we'll leave that information in the show notes. And we really look forward to working with you. So all good things. We're really excited to be reading this book. We'll be continuing the conversation over on the Facebook Messenger chat for the book club. So if you have questions, comments, aha moments, we would love to see them, hear them from you. And we welcome you to do that. I hope you have a great rest of your week.
Bye, everyone. Enjoy your day.